Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole workshop meeting of January 16, 2019 to order. To order. Mr. CAO. I'd like to begin by reading a safety notice. Hi, Your Worship. How are you? Excellent. I'm living the dream. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors to my left and obey all instructions given by the clerk. Miss Julie, raise your hand so people know in a case of emergency you are the person directing. If assistance is required, please see the clerk. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. There's a little sign in the northeast corner. I think it says meeting place. Also, Town of Lincoln Committee and Council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the public for attending this afternoon's meeting. And I just want to remind everyone of our rules for engagement to please be respectful while others are speaking and to please refrain from clapping. Delegations will have 5 minutes to speak and are asked to stay focused on the agenda item. Please remember to silence all your cellular devices. Roll call of council. We've got regrets from Councillor Reimer. Staff are in attendance, I see. Welcome. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest for this afternoon's meeting? I see none. Statutory public meetings. There are no statutory public meetings on the agenda. Delegations, we have none. Consent agenda, we have none. So let's get right into our regular agenda. We are now considering item 7.1, Parks, Recreation, and Culture Master Plan. Steve Langlois from Monteith Brown Planning Consultants will be providing a presentation on this topic. Welcome, Mr. Langlois.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be your agenda this afternoon. I was in front of council, I believe, late last year, provided an introduction to the master plan itself at that point in time. What we'll be doing this time around is providing an update as to where we are. We're focusing on what we've heard so far from the public engagement program. So we'll spend a fair bit of time on that item, and then certainly any questions, comments, suggestions that you have, we'll take at the end of the presentation. So just a bit of a refresher so you have a sense of who we are. We have several consultant groups that we work with on a regular basis that are part of our team. We have a sense of the disciplines that are required for an undertaking of this nature. So Monteith Brown Planning Consultants. We do a lot of the public engagement trends, report deliverable work. With Tucker Reed and Associates, who is a subject matter expert as it relates to service delivery and programming. Wickens Green Space consultants that are working more on parkland standards, and Watson and Associates, and they certainly have a breadth of experience on the financial side. So now, what is a master plan? It is the master plan itself is Parks, Recreation, and Culture. It will provide a framework based on community needs and financial accountability for decision making for the next 10 years. The plan will assist council, it will assist staff, it will assist the community in making strategic investments to ensure a healthy community, improve the quality of life of residents, and encourage a strong economy and sustainable environment. This is the town's first comprehensive undertaking of this nature for these subject items. The scope of the plan includes a number of items. We'll be seeking to examine service levels across the municipality, all communities within the town, looking at parks, open spaces and trails, recreation, sport and cultural facilities, programs, events and activities, operations, what we call the behind the scenes things like policy development, staffing levels, communications and what have you, and financial and implementation strategies. The idea is to create an actionable, working, living document that will be a useful tool for planning for the next 10 years. Key objectives for the study is to establish an overall vision for Parks, Recreation, Culture in Lincoln, engage the community in an inclusive and productive process that supports the plan, identify needs based on changing demographics and participation trends, developing broad strategies to meet identified needs, future directions, and aligning municipal and community efforts, operations, budgets through priority setting. The plan itself will support several ongoing and future capital projects. I think there was a presentation here the other night around Serena Park and action sports. You have your Prudhome's Park, other park development. Several of those are ongoing and are aligned with the emerging directions of the master plan itself. So what can you expect from the plan? The master plan itself will be a valuable resource for the town and community and will include deliverables such as demographics and trends, inventories of parks, services, and facilities, a review of the existing service delivery system, public consultation details and summaries, vision and guiding principles, directions on several of those items I mentioned earlier, programs, service delivery, staffing, policy development, park standards, and more, identification of current and future capital needs, and an action plan with prioritized recommendations. Once accepted by council, the plan itself will provide guidance for future decision-making. It's important to know that this is a resource for council. Any major capital projects would be referred back to an annual budget process. So when you're approving the master plan, you'll tend to be approving it in principle with other decisions being made along the way through a phased implementation of the plan. And any major capital or policy projects would also trigger additional public consultation as you go through. So a park master plan, facility redevelopment, this does not absolve staff or council of any future engagement or consultation. So, but what we look to do is align priorities with the master plan moving forward. So just to orient you to our progress, we're now in phase 2, background review, analysis, that's where we're at. Our timeline is to come back to this council with a final master plan for your review before summer, so that would be June. In the interim, there will be other opportunities to provide input. We'll be looking to host some additional public input sessions, likely in late April. So just sort of put that on your radar at this moment in time. So planning for the future requires a strong foundation. The master plan's building blocks, the first one is bolded because that will be the focus of this presentation. It's public and stakeholder engagement. A few of the other items we've referred to along the way: demographics, growth, trends, policy, program, guidelines, inventories. All of that is well in place at this moment in time. So in terms of our public engagement program, a number of different tactics and tools have been used and will continue to be used throughout the project's duration. There is a project website. That web link is available through the town's website, as well as on all the promotional material. It will be updated shortly. We'll be putting some summaries of some public consultation on there, for example, keeping folks involved as they go through. It was vital to pushing out and collecting information on our community survey. I'll report on that in a moment. Stakeholder interviews, workshops were held, public information centers, which were open houses in 4 different areas of Lincoln. Community outreach was extensive, using posters, postcards, pop-up signs, social media, email blasts, newsletters, as well as an exciting option for us, the ability to use this Youth Voice app that was facilitated by Spark Lincoln. But those items offered us an opportunity to promote the project throughout Lincoln. And then internal engagement through council, committee, and small group staff interviews, for example. So I'll speak to some of the outcomes of those on coming slides. So what we've heard so far. So it's a bit about the master plan itself, a quick level. It's your 10-cent tour, as it were. I'll start with the online survey, which was available for about 7 weeks late last year. We received just under 350 completed responses to that. That's a strong number. I think it's one that gives us a good level of confidence in the results. We were able to as well break that down by a few different indicators. to see if there was any significant difference in opinion based on a person's area of residence, as well as any barriers to participation that they may have. So I'll be reporting on a few of those as we go through. Now, being a self-selected survey, it's important that we look at the respondent demographics. So we know where people are responding from, their age and what have you. We did get representation from across the town. What you'll see on this chart is about 73% did live closest to Beamsville. So there was no rural area. We asked living closest to your 5 main settlement areas. So we do think we're a little bit high as it relates to that, but we did get good representation from all areas of the municipality. All ages were also represented, and as you would with surveys of this nature, being self-selected, you tend to get families, active adults do tend to participate a little bit more strongly, but we try to balance that off with consultation with seniors. We provide some hard copy surveys through your Lincoln Community Center, your seniors group, and we receive some input from them, as well as through the stakeholder interview process. So I'll hit you with a number of different slides that might be very difficult for you to read. I apologize for that, but if you have any questions, I can certainly come back to any of these during question period. Now, we asked what people like to do with their time. This shows a list of different parks and recreation activities, and what you'll find is that the most popular activities amongst those are those that are generally all ages. They tend to be unstructured activities, non-registered, low cost, and they tend to be outdoor. So things like trail walking, hiking, use of playgrounds. Swimming can be an indoor or outdoor, it can be structured, unstructured. The ice sports is actually your top structured activity. That comes in around number 4 or 5. Beach activities, fitness activities, use of splash pad, and dog walking. Individual specialized types of activities tended to rank the lowest in terms of participation levels. Now, we asked the same question for arts and culture activities, and what we found here, community events were the most popular by far. Well, not quite by far, but they did keep coming up as a theme and a strength of this community, and with folks seeking more opportunities as well, but they were quite popular. And what we found is that the top arts and cultural activities tended to rival the top parks and recreation activities as well, in terms of level of interest. So that's a snapshot of what your residents like to do with their time at present. Now, we asked about constraints. Are things keeping them from participating as often as they would like? The barrier question. Divided into 2 different pie charts. The one on the left is Parks and Recreation. The one on the right is Arts and Culture. On the Parks and Recreation side on the left, we found that 40% indicated that they were unable to participate in parks and recreation activities as often as they would like, so indicating some form of barrier. The main reason there was a lack of desired programs or facilities. And one of those geographical nuances that we found was that was particularly potent in Beamsville, where the lack of facilities in particular was mentioned at a much higher rate. Things like gymnasiums, playgrounds, off-leash dog parks, outdoor ice rinks, bicycle playgrounds tended to be desired more strongly by residents living closest to Beamsville. As it relates to arts and cultural activities, 33%, so a slightly lower percentage, were unable to participate as often as they would like, indicating fewer barriers to participation. The main reason here was lack of time, too busy, and that's one of those that is a challenge for most municipalities to address. But I think it's good to see that it wasn't a lack of opportunity necessarily, but rather a lack of time. So as we start to unpack this, you'll see some trends that sort of start to fall into place. We looked at where are people participating? Are they going outside of Lincoln for their activities? And by the nature of certain activities, they will need to do so. 1/3 of respondents participated in parks and recreation activities outside of Lincoln. Most reason being is that there was no desire. The facility that they're desiring was not available here. That tended to be an indoor pool. as we get in most municipalities that don't have indoor pools, there's usually a strong desire for them. The most commonly requested activities, and you'll see that denoted by the infographics at the bottom, things that people were looking for that weren't necessarily available here locally, some form of swimming, racket sports, and that would be anything from usually tennis. Pickleball is the emerging racket sport in Ontario and Canada for that matter. Age-specific programming, so looking for more for youth, for adults, for older adults. Active transportation tended to be trails, bike lanes, things of that nature, and you're currently working on a transportation master plan that will delve more deeply into that, as well as different forms of fitness programming. As relates to arts and culture, more than half of your survey respondents would travel outside of Lincoln to participate, and this is probably more your bigger ticket events, things that you would go into the city of Toronto for, whether it's a concert or a musical, or things that, because of their population, they would tend to offer more readily. The activities that folks were looking for most notably were musical performances. We heard strong support for your concert series along the lake. So, more opportunities for things of that nature, different community events, theater arts, visual arts, and individual classes. Looking at levels of satisfaction, I will point out we made one change to this presentation versus what's in your package. Right along the bottom, not satisfied, if you're following along here, the not satisfied should read satisfied, so cross out the not. It'll be corrected on this version. And satisfied, which is the darker blue, should read not satisfied. So I apologize for that, but in the nick of time, we caught it, I would say. Tomato, tomato, I guess.
I was looking out my window for pitchforks, but that's okay.
The good news is satisfaction levels are relatively strong. These would be denoted by the light blue here. So, are you satisfied with indoor recreation facilities? 74%. Where we start getting into it, and I'll focus less on the good stuff, but more the areas that might, be areas for improvement. Beaches and waterfront parks had among the lowest levels of satisfaction. And if you recall, beaches, very popular activity for people to be using. So opportunities in Prudhome's, for example, improvements in any waterfront parks, I anticipate we would have strong support from the public for that. Arts and cultural facilities also had a lower level of satisfaction. You tend to find people that are sort of on the fence as it relates to arts and culture, because it's not, as we use the term, people may not, it may not resonate as strongly with them, but when we start talking about festivals and community events, that's when it starts triggering the things that the broad populace is looking for. So that's still an area that we know has some opportunity for improvement over time. It will happen a little bit more organically. There will be many community partners involved as well. Now, this is a graph you'll probably come back to a few times over the course of this planning process and maybe into future years. This is a laundry list of different types of facilities. So as much as we had good levels of satisfaction, there's also strong support for additional spending. Now, tie that to your budget, we know, and tie that to taxes, and that's your job as a council. But it's mostly a prioritized ranking of what people are looking for. So what we look at is sort of the top four. Again, these are the types of facilities that tend to be outdoor, all age, casual types of infrastructure, whether it's trails, beaches. Swimming pools is the one that stands out a little bit there. Acquisition of parks and open space, playgrounds, splash pads. Indoor swimming pools notwithstanding, all of these are low-cost facilities for people to participate in. Near the bottom end, you'll see arts and cultural items tended to fall towards the bottom in terms of support for additional spending, as well as some other individual sports that just wouldn't resonate with the broader population. We do see pickleball there. One thing to keep in mind as we as planners have to decipher this information as well is we recognize that the survey is one tool that we have We have to balance that against the other public input that we're getting from stakeholders, from the public input sessions, from trends, from best practice, from demographics. So it's not necessarily to say that we wouldn't be supporting some recommendations in certain areas based on where they fall on this particular graph, but rather that there's a context that this needs to be filtered through. And just a couple more slides on this. Perceived levels of service. There were a number of statements that were asked, and the ones with the yellow boxes, or sorry, the red boxes, I'll just point out a little bit of what we deciphered, what we took away from that. While affordability is not identified as a significant concern, and it was by, I should balance that off against some stakeholder groups around rates and fees. It did come up in that context. Many feel that they're not getting value for their tax dollars and are seeking new parks, recreation, and culture amenities. So you're a growing community. You have folks that have lived here a long time. You also have folks that are new to the community and bringing expectations with them as well. So I think that's where some of the takeaways from those particular statements. So I'll move on from the online survey. I have a couple slides here from our 4 open houses. We had about 100 people out to those 4 open houses. They were held throughout the municipality, and 43% of the comments related to recreational items, things like sports fields, community centers, splash pads. 21% related to parks, open space, trails. 20% to sort of the experience within these types of spaces, concerns around safety, shade in parks, seating in parks, and service delivery as well. So that just gives us a touch point on what we were hearing about from your residents. Also at the public input sessions, we held a straw poll priority voting results. So these were opportunities for people to essentially put some votes into what they thought would be the highest priorities. And what we saw, the 3 highest priority areas that came out of this were all sort of public-facing tangible options. They were parks and outdoor facilities and programs, recreation facilities and programs, and special events and family activities. A few of our other engagement opportunities included child and youth voice opportunities. So the children at the PICs had an opportunity to draw what they would like to do in a park. So you see some of those imagery here. The Spark Lincoln app also engaged over 400 youth in identifying what they like most about Lincoln, what they would like to see improved. And a few things that stood out from us on that skateboard park. Received a very high number of requests for improvement being provision in this case, since there are none here at present. Many requested improvements to pools, and that could be improvements to the existing pool that you have or provision of additional, in this case likely indoor pool facilities. And waterfront and beaches were also identified as very popular amenities. So you're starting to see a lot of the same sort of themes popping up. Last, but certainly not least, we had an opportunity to interview, and I think we've had written submissions in addition since this time, so the number's probably a little bit higher than this, but we'll say around 35 different organizations participated in our process, anyone from minor sports to health unit to the Active Transportation Committee, to cultural interests. They were all represented, and everyone had an opportunity to participate. Some of the key themes that came from that, so I'll just read this as quickly as I can, and we can come back to it if you like, but recognition that many unique attributes here in Lincoln, wanted to continue to build on those and highlight those to residents and visitors. Stakeholders want to be engaged, they want to stay engaged, they want to stay informed of things that are happening in the community. Many indicated that there were things that were keeping them from participating fully or fully realizing their mandate. A desire for rates and fees to be reviewed on a more regular basis, and make sure that they were some alignment with the service level that they were getting as a result of those fees. Recognition that service providers deliver great programs, but more programming is needed. Support for volunteers is critical to building capacity. We recognize that the town of Lincoln is not being asked to do everything themselves. You have a very strong volunteer base, but they will need assistance and continue to need assistance along the way. Connecting people, connecting facilities to destinations will be critical as well. There's an opportunity and need to plan for the future of arts and culture in Lincoln. There were several specific suggestions for improvements to parks spaces, as well as new types of amenities were also requested, and all of that will be well documented in our reporting. So just to summarize, some of the key themes that we've taken away from this community consultation, and we recognize that the master plan provides an opportunity to develop a vision for parks, recreation, and culture in the community. We'll be seeking to align that with industry best practices and sectoral guidelines, such as the Framework for Recreation Canada, as well as the town's community vision and other ongoing works that you have, economic development, transportation, and so on. It provides us an opportunity to prepare for and manage change, your growing community. Demographics are changing. We want to be able to respond to that. It's an opportunity to establish effective service levels and service models and appropriate levels. Opportunity to support existing parks and facilities and infrastructure and address emerging needs and activities. So with that, our next steps, we're working with our project team to finalize a phase 1 report. That's more of a background context report. We're working on phase 2 as we speak. Vision development, the assessments of service, parks, facilities. The draft plan will be coming out to council, to the public in April. There will be ongoing consultation on that, and then coming back to committee and or council prior to summer. So with that, I would be pleased to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Excellent presentation. Councillor Renchima, you are first.
Thank you, Chair Pachariba. Interesting statistics, and I saw, again, there was a lot of participation from people in Beamsville, and so I was kind of surprised when I saw about the statistics on people interested in an off-leash dog park, because I heard about it constantly when I was going door to door during the campaign, that everybody wants that. And I guess it makes sense as the more you intensify, people come to town, they move into smaller places, and they have animals. But I heard a lot about people walking a dog park, and I asked a lot of people wanting a dog park, sorry, not walking a dog park, but I asked a lot of people, what kinds of problems do you see with dog parks? And I didn't get a lot of negative comments at all, just people seem to want them. There's different models. There's entire parks that are dog parks. There's dog parks that are just a section of the dog park being fenced off that people can go in and let their dogs run around. So I guess I'm curious what kind of, I have two questions, that's one. What kind of feedback did you get other than maybe the surveys about dog parks? Did you hear about it? Did you hear about it? What did you hear?
Through you, Mr. Chair. It did come up at a few of our public open houses. I think dog parks are becoming a standard level of service in some larger municipalities, and you're right to sort of hit on the density driver for this. People have smaller backyards. The number of pets that society has per capita is increasing as well, and they have a place in our hearts. So the demand is there as a society, and what we would tend to look for, it becomes a bit of a balance. Would one be used here? Yes, but there's two key critical factors for success that we see in other communities. One is that you find an appropriate site for it. So I'm not saying that we haven't written the recommendation yet, but just from our experience elsewhere, the site makes a huge difference. It needs to be accessible, it needs to be appropriate, it needs to be large enough, it needs to be visible, but it can't be in people's backyards. So these are the things that often make or break a project. So that's first and foremost. And secondly is having some sort of stewardship or management group, and just a strong volunteer base that will really, they'll be the ones helping to champion it and manage it to some degree. So it becomes a little bit more self-sustaining, as it were. So you would look for those factors to be in place prior to to rolling something like that out.
Yeah. So what you're saying about, so I did hear people, so what you're saying about people moving from, or being more popular in larger municipalities, that kind of makes sense, because we do have people moving from larger municipalities here and saying, where's my dog park? But I still, yeah, they still want a dog park now, so, but it's interesting what you're saying. I also have a question, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind. One
Go
more
ahead.
question, thank you. And when I say they want a dog park, I'm talking mostly about people in the more intensified area. A lot of people I spoke to. So you talked about improvements to existing facilities and facility analysis. So one of the things that I hear about fairly regularly in Ward 1 is lighting in Hillary Bald Park. So what kind of feedback did you get about lighting? Any other areas that people are talking about that requiring future lighting or installing lighting to existing facilities?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So one of the key things to keep in mind is that this is a Lincoln-wide, town-wide master plan. So as much as we'll hear suggestions for certain parks, it's not necessarily a park-specific plan. So we wouldn't go out and seek input specifically on one site. So with that understanding, we know that certainly there's a bit of an opportunity. There is still some open space in Hillary Bald Park. So we're looking very closely at any existing parks to see, is there opportunity for improvements? Are we hearing things from the public? Do they fit with trends and best practices? And that's anything from what we tend to hear just more generally from the public is seating, shade, washrooms are key to energizing and animating our parks, because those are things that people are looking, of all ages, are looking for. Our neighborhood parks, our community parks are more than just for kids, as they kind of were when we were growing up, perhaps. You put it in a playground and you'd be done with it. It's not necessarily the case anymore. So, lighting, I can't recall any real specific suggestions from the community on that. It does beg questions of appropriate use, questions of safety. So, we would have to look into that in a little bit more detail. Sometimes lighting provides a perceived sense of safety. So, I would just caution if that's something to be considered.
Okay, and you said something about making a recommendation earlier on. Will you, so I haven't seen I'm not familiar with exactly what the master plan is going to come out, but are there going to be any recommendations for locations of any kinds of facilities, or is it generally, this is a need, we see a stronger need in this general area, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, where there is, it'll be a blend, where the need is now and the opportunity exists. So we talk about parks that are undeveloped, not those parks that are already in the planning or development stages, but we have some newer parks that might be coming online. So Prudhome's, for example, would have an opportunity to influence the level of amenity, the type of amenity there. But that would still go towards more, you'd still have some specific consultation around that park. So where the opportunity exists, yes. Where it's replacement of, where you have an aging infrastructure consideration. For example, both of your Lions parks are dealing with aging infrastructure, from sports fields to pools to arenas. Those will be site-specific types of conversations. Where the needs are more future, it becomes more of a question of, we'll look at where the growth is occurring, what is the distribution of amenities and distribution of people, and we'll try to provide some guidance and provide as well some site selection guidelines within the plan for that. So It really depends on the level of amenity and if a geographic gap exists, or we're trying to enhance geographic accessibility, or if it's something that will just sort of have to evolve and with more community conversation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Councillor Patriva. Through you to the presenter, I just wanted to stay on the theme that Councillor Rinjima was on, because certainly when we were at the door, it was probably the biggest thing I heard about was dog parks, like bar none. And it's funny what you remember from those conversations, especially when you get a door slammed in your face. So one of the comments that I want to make is that I think people are looking for dog parks, and now people are looking for skateboard parks. And I think the reason they're asking more often is because they have an opportunity to travel just not too far down the road to Grimsby, where there's 3 or 4. And what I heard at the door just before it got slammed in my face was go down to the parks and find out how many Lincoln residents are at Grimsby dog parks. And I was told the number's 30%. So people are upset that they're paying their taxes here and having to travel to Grimsby and to West Lincoln now to take their kids for skateboard parks. That's what I heard at the door, loud and clear. So I just wanted to reinforce the comment that Councillor Rinja had made. The other comment I made to our CAO between Christmas and New Year's, and I was really glad, Steve, that you made that comment about stakeholder buy-in. Because I had an opportunity to talk to someone who spent his whole life in Parks and Recreation in Hamilton, Burlington, and Halton Hills. And that's exactly what he said to me when I said, what do you do to make sure you embrace the user group? And he said, you need to engage your staff to go to the public, similar to what we do with these active transportation groups. And you get committee members, and he said what you'll find quite often is that residents who are really bombastic and very, very, very vocal, they find very quickly that it's going to take responsibility, legality, and all these things to put them in place. And he said quite often they come back, but they don't come back right away. They come back a year later or 2 years later when they're prepared, when they know that it's an ownership and a collaboration that's being requested. So I think that's a really, really important point that you made. Thank you very much.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. Through you to the delegation. This is really coming together. I like all the information that we're getting, but I have to remember that it's just a snapshot. And so how much weight do we put on that survey when you look at the percentages? And I did, that dog park thing kind of jumped out at me as well, but that's in Beamsville where, it's a different group, a different density. I didn't hear about a dog park in the rural areas at all. So I guess I'm trying to figure out across the whole town what truly are the priorities. I know this is just, it's putting it all out there, but I guess we've got to find what they truly are. And I was also looking at the page, the perceived levels of service, and those results are kind of, kind of disappointing. But then again, it's just a snapshot, right? So how much weight do we put? I guess that's what I'm looking for. Like, how much weight do we put behind these percentages and these, both ways, right? Negative for the levels of service. I guess that's kind of my question.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I wish I could give you an answer. I wish I could give you a percentage on how much weight to put on it. We've prepared over 150 master plans across Ontario in the last 40 years. I only say that because we just recently added up the projects. But it becomes trying to find the right balance. So I mentioned sort of those building blocks off the top. I think there were about 6 different building blocks. Public and stakeholder engagement is one. Now it's one of the most critical ones because this is what is going to help make it a Lincoln plan. But we do look at what your growth and demographics are. The population pyramid is not a pyramid anymore, for example, and I know this is not news, but there's often a lag in how we design our programs, facilities, and parks to match with our population. So we know from that and other indicators and what other communities are doing that we need to provide for accessibility. There's more people with different mobility issues. There's more people that are participating across the entire spectrum of age and ability. So those sorts of things become very important. We know from the industry and the mandate of community services that we want to sell the quality of life here. We want that to be an active quality of life. We want people to enjoy enjoy active lifestyles. So things that make it easy for people to participate tend to be come out as high priorities in this. So, how that filters down to things like do we need a dog park in Jordan? Probably not. But that's not to say we're not asking those questions or listening to the input, because rural areas are going to be different. So that's where, again, understanding the growth, the form of growth, the density, and dog parks are a good example of where that, there is going to be a difference. We'll do these in rural municipalities, and we've even seen dog parks in rural municipalities, and they don't get, by and large, are not terribly well used. So what we rely on is we come back to those building blocks and try to sort of build the case. It's very much a social planning exercise. It needs to make sense to you. So all the recommendations will need to pass the smell test, as it were, to this council and to your community, and they'll have an opportunity to review and provide input on that draft plan.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Councillor Michaluk.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the presenter. I'm just looking at the data here with regards to beaches and waterfront parks. My understanding, I always thought we had a gem of a waterfront park, and it seems to be well supported. 86% support investment, 3% oppose. But then, in the chart before, I'm curious. I'm kind of confused by that number that they would like us to 40% want us to spend more, or? It would have been on page 17 and 17 and 18.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think what my takeaway from that is agree completely that your waterfront, your primary waterfront park is well used. We know that. We've been out there. We've seen it on a slow day, and it was very busy. But sometimes success breeds success, and I think that's the case that we're looking at here. Is that folks are looking for more. Access to waterfront is a primary desire for most communities in Ontario. We're surrounded by an excellent waterfront, but there's a prime real estate mentality around that, and it's difficult to expand that easily and quickly. But we know that I think what you have, it's just building on trying to offer opportunities for more of that. Trails along waterfronts tend to be very popular. We know that from other communities. The views, the vistas available to it. We have an opportunity with the Prudhome's development to also offer additional waterfront park space. So I think what this tells us is we want to make sure we can make the most of that, and we can also expect a high degree of public support and public use of that park space.
Okay, so through your talking with all the citizens and residents in that, was there any input offered or any feedback with regards to what are we doing well, what can we improve on, how can we make it better? It seems like, I'm surprised by those two numbers being so close.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, there were a lot of positive, and I mean, we often do these presentations and we focus on what are the areas of improvement, but there were many positive aspects. Certainly we heard first and foremost about the community volunteers that are out there doing, providing a lot of the services, providing a lot of the programs. We know that's the backbone of most smaller communities and continues to, will continue to be so. We hear about the staff team that you have in place and their willingness to listen, to try new things, to work with the groups. And we know, that can always be improved, but there seems to be an acknowledgement that, there's been a bit of a sea change at the staff level, and they're starting to see that. Just the quality of life here and the unique natural aspects to the community that drew them here in the first place or keep them here. They want to see those opportunities expanded, whether it be trails along the escarpment, trails along the river. That active transportation piece was also very important. So those were just some of the things that resonated with me.
Feedback, okay, thank you.
Councilor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Steve. Really interesting taste of what we're going to see in June, and very, very wide spectrum of interests and needs and wants, and I wonder in your work, looking at a community like ours, 23 to 25,000 people, and all of this coming at us. Is there recommendations that you make in your Parks Master Plan to look at communities that maybe are of similar size and have done unique things that maybe have got a multi-purpose facility that addresses 2, 3, 4, 5 of these things within one building or one area, and maybe channels the town to that location when normally they wouldn't go there because it's too far away. But since there's this multi unit, who knows what's in it, pickleball, tennis, basketball, whatever is in it. Are you able to do some of that for us in the Parks Master Plan? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. So when it comes to facilities, for a couple things, but we do look at per capita standards or targets, and they're just that. They're targets. You may or may not achieve them, but it gives us a sense of the benchmark that's out there. What are other communities providing? One ice pad per X number of registrants or per population, for example. That's one of the tools that we use. What you're referring to as well is sort of the trends in facility design, program delivery, and definitely community hubs, neighborhood hubs, multi-use facilities achieve greater amounts of visits, greater usage, greater revenue potential. People are looking for that one-stop shopping opportunity. At the same time, it needs to be right-sized for your community now and into the future. So, we would have to find that appropriate balance for a community of your size. An indoor pool is one example where we might be getting a lot of express public demand for. But I think as a council and administration, you need to look very closely at also not only the economics of that, but also other opportunities in adjacent municipalities, whether it's the YMCA or others. So that's one where I just point that out, where the per capita target might be a helpful benchmark to use as well. So.
Good. So we can expect to have some of that in the Parks Master Plan, some of that, logic around our size of community.
Absolutely.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. And just, it's great that you say that, because I had highlighted from the first 4 slides about creating a working, living 10-year document, support ongoing and future capital projects. Councilor Renjima had asked about best practices, because I think the bugaboo with a town that of our size and 4, 5 urban centers is to break that notion that things need to be replicated in all 5 areas. So looking for a master plan that says, okay, you know what, you need 1 arena, you have 2. But the park in the East End doesn't need to be the same as the park in the West End. They should be completely different, so the population will travel around. We talked at our last term of council about trying to create a one-town mentality, and fracturing and replicating things across the municipality doesn't do that at all. I think and just from a selfish point of view, I like the fact that walking trails and active transportation is rating really high because I'm the vice chair on that committee. So, I mean, that's terrific. That gives some validation to those lay members on that who have put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. I think one of the missteps, though, was, like all surveys, you had a group of 9 of us that had went door to door and probably visited upwards of 5,000 houses and got direct feedback. And there's been no chance for us to give that information to you. Like Councillor Renjima about the dog parks, and Councillor Bernay, I had the same door slammed in my face. I can tell you the street, I can tell you the door number and everything, but we got a lot of that at the door, and it was about, and it you know, it kind of leads to those perceived levels of service, you know, provision of new parks, recreation, and cultural amenities. The 40% that are looking for more. The people up on Ashby Drive that they've got 2 elements in a huge park, you know, promise that that's going to come out. So hopefully, through this master plan, there will be that, okay, well, you know, like you say, you know, look at a municipality like Milton, that's a conglomeration of towns. Well, Milton and Acton and they both don't have velodromes, but there's one central one. And it's things like that I think that's really the want that's going to come out of this, and then it's up to us to sell it. It's up to us to sell that vision and the rationale. You know, like you said, you don't need a dog park in the rural areas. People have already adapted to that. And I like the fact too that it's the champions, right? You need that public to stand up. And it can't be us all the time doing it. So, thank you very much. Look forward to the continued engagement. Look forward to the final document and taking it and running with it. So, appreciate it. Thank you. We look forward to it. We'll require a mover for the motion to receive and file this item. Councillor Timmers. Okay, so Councillor Timmers moves this. All in favor? I see that's unanimous. There's no confidential items. Do we have any staff remarks about the report? I see none. I see yes. I see maybe. You're all good? Okay. We pretty much did the committee remarks, so being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned, and we will reconvene at 6 p.m. for the Committee of the Whole budget. Thank you very much.